Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can sound like a pro and gain more podcast fans. Today's tip is to limit your numbers. Great news, podcaster! The 7-Star Agency and DAX's podcast analysis did a study of 2,000 people in the UK. The study found that 3,600,000 people listened to podcasts in April 2016. 80% of them see podcasts as a good alternative to music, while 75% consider them time well spent. 3/4 of them listen to learn, 95% listen at home, 56% while doing household chores, and 1 out of 3 listeners say they'd pay for podcasts without commercials. Actual stats, by the way. But did you catch all of them? Any of them? Maybe a couple? Do you remember them? I hear this in a lot of podcasts. Hosts love stats. Listeners love them. And why not? They're great. No matter the subject, I say use more stats. Numbers are easy to consume and they can help you make your point. But too many numeric details, especially close together, are confusing. When you combine them all at once, they lose their impact and get lost in your message. Your listener can't comprehend a whole slew of numbers being thrown at them. They're already likely doing something while listening to your podcast. The last thing I want to do as a listener is start digging around for the skip button because I missed all those numbers you were throwing around. Plus, as a listener, I don't want to work that hard. Podcasting is not a place to be throwing around a ton of numbers. The one that really kills me is when I hear a podcaster share their income report, line by line, down to the penny. Really? This does not make for a great episode. Anyone who really wants to see those numbers that you're willing to share would most likely want to actually see them. So put them in your show notes or tell the listener to find them in your latest blog so they can spend some time analyzing them if that's what they're into. That's just more time spent on your website and more clicks. Remember listening to commercials on the radio? After 25 seconds of content, you usually would hear a phone number repeated 3 times. It was the only way to get the message across.
1-800-555-7777. Call 1-800-555-7777. That's 1-800-555-7777.
Thank goodness these days we have the internet and websites. My advice is to keep it simple with the numbers. If you can make your point with 1 number, do it. But try to limit it to 2 figures at a time in a sentence, thought, or idea. If there are a lot of numbers that you do want to share in an episode, break them up. Then break them down and discuss the relevance of them before introducing more numbers. The other things that will make your numbers more listener-friendly are choosing the one that has the biggest impact. What sounds more impressive? 9% of children get the recommended amount of physical activity versus 91% of children don't get the recommended amount of physical activity. You should also consider what's easier to say. $1,400 versus $1,400. Comprehension is key, so slow down a little when you're shooting out stats. And if they're truly impressive numbers, repeat them. The other trick is to round up or down, or maybe change it to a fraction so it's easier on the ears. Instead of saying 34% of people, you might go with 1/3 of people. And that stat about the kids I shared with you, I could have also said less than 10% of kids get the recommended amount of physical activity. And skip the decimals unless it's really, really important. Let me be clear. I'm not saying don't use numbers in your podcast. Just don't use too many of them at once. Don't overwhelm your listener with an onslaught of them. Used right, numbers and stats are great conversation sparkers, extremely effective in backing up your argument, and rather easy to find on any subject you might be talking about. So remember, if you piss off 90% of your listeners by giving them 16 stats to analyze in the first 120 seconds of your podcast, you'll be left with one very unhappy listener. And I hope that's just the tip you need. And one more stat for you. 4 out of 5 dentists agree that the Just the Tip podcast is the fastest way to a better podcast. You'll be grinning ear to ear after your one-on-one podcast critique session with me. You'll get the help and the tools to make your podcast more listener-centric, the best way to get more fans. Did I mention dissecting podcasts is my superpower? Check it out for yourself at podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Wahlberg. See ya!